Well, hello YouTube, it's me, Fortmaster, and welcome back to another reaction. This time by one LazerPig. So, if you haven't heard of LazerPig, I don't know how to really describe it. More like, sort of like pseudo-comedic history documentaries. You've probably seen stuff exactly like that if you're at all into, like, history, World War II, tanks, weapons, all that sort of stuff. And I think I, like a lot of other people, discovered him because of, this video right here. And I've been watching him, and I was thinking, since I've started doing this reaction thing a lot, actual doing it more, I've been trying to think of other channels I like watching, besides, Game Theory and Markiplier, and LazerPig was thinking of that, and I was wondering, when is his next one, and it's today, yay, and it's about the Moskuva, that ship that the Russians lost a couple of months ago. So this is most likely going to be really fun. Without further ado, let's start.
So I may be a little late to the party on this one.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about it.
Yes, I know everyone wants a Ukraine Part 3, but war is chaos. And like I said before, the ground situation changes constantly. You want proof? In this past week, I've had to re-record this video 3 times because there has been a major update which has completely buggered up everything I've said. Right now, there is a major offensive going on in Kherson, and that would be news enough. And I even had this joke plan for all the Russian military bloggers trying to pass the whole thing off as a feint and a distraction, and that Kharkiv is the real target. And then, just as reinforcements arrived in Kherson, just as the major elements of the 3rd got off the train in their shiny new AK-12s and T-90Ms, Ukraine attacked Kharkiv. It was a distraction. The Russians in the north went into blind panic mode, so much so that our elements of the SOBR units, that's the Special Response Unit of the Spetsnaz, opened fire on each other. Now, these two fronts are
Okay, I didn't know about that. That is news to me. I hadn't heard about that. And just the fact, I mean, I don't think it's that bad of a thing to say that I wish that, like, Ukraine had more outside help in the form of, other people on the ground. But the fact that Ukraine is making such good grounds against Russia with literally just equipment, equipment lend-lease, basically. Awesome, just... And as somebody with relatives in another small European country that is near the Russian border, it does my heart good.
Highly significant. If Kherson falls, if Ukraine takes it back, they can repair the bridges leading across the Dnieper, or more than likely set up a pontoon bridge. I'm probably not pronouncing the name of that river correctly, but this threatens the entire southern region, an area of terrain that Russia previously had an advantage in because, well, that terrain is very difficult to defend, and it's perfect for mass tank movements. But in a few weeks' time, the autumn rains will begin, and this entire region is going to turn into the same mud swamp that apparently stopped the Nazis, meaning they can't use it for mass tank formations and have to defend the hardest terrain to defend at the worst time of the year with the almost nothing that they have left. Which,
again, I'm sorry I'm pausing this, but just the whole thing, Russia saying that they were going in to denazify Ukraine, and then that they're the ones falling for all the same tricks and ploys and follies that the Nazis were the ones that fell for last time. What does it say? I remember somebody saying that history does not repeat itself, it rhymes.
Means Metapol, the largest transport hub in the entire southern region, is now under immense threat. Ukraine could also retake Mariupol, or it could even attempt to invade and retake Crimea. However, if they win in the north, at Kharkiv, this puts them directly on the border with Russia. That means there is nothing, absolutely nothing, stopping them from invading Russia. And this is Russia's biggest fear. You see, Russia still do not have an overall commander. It has 2. one in the north and one in the south. Now the South Boy outranks the North Boy, but North Boy has priority because he's defending the border. That means anytime Ukraine pokes him, he hits the panic alarm and everything heading south has to turn around. That includes supplies, replacement equipment, and men. And all that takes about 24 hours, not including loading and unloading time, to get supplies from the south to the north and vice versa. Though the ground war is chaotic and we are hearing different things from different units, it does seem that Ukraine is doing quite well. In fact, in Kharkiv, some units have basically nothing in front of them. This has allowed their artillery units to get much closer than anticipated. They targeted radar installations and anti-air units mainly, and since then the Ukrainian Air Force has basically unleashed hell against the Russians. 27 confirmed airstrikes so far against Russian command posts, ammunition dumps, and army gatherings with 0 known losses. They even managed to shoot down an Su-24. So depending on how the situation unfolds, this is going to be the make it or break it moment for Ukraine. Ukraine is throwing everything it has into this assault, and Russia is throwing everything back. Within these pockets lie the last of Russia's elites. That's the last of the VDV, the last of the 45th GRU Special Forces Brigade, the last of the best tank forces outside of the 1st, the last of the DPR forces, the last of the 3rd, the last of the best equipment and units that Russia currently has.
Oh, that's not a nice
If they
looking
lose
barrel.
those units, they have nothing left to continue the advance with. That's it. Ukraine has basically won. I'd love to get into more detail about this, specifically how it has been affecting things back in Russia and the state-sponsored media, because there has been no event in the history of this war that has triggered the Russians so hard. We've seen every excuse on the planet. Even Captain Doesn't Know How Artillery Works was dragged up from the grave to give an opinion. Yes, the dancing anime girls are part of the video. Those were not added in later. Imagine if I
What?
Imagine me talking about a serious military operation where people are dying and I get this cute anime boy in the corner just dancing along to K-pop as I discuss it. I mean, some of you would probably like that. I personally think it's a bit tasteless, but you know... whatever. Oh, but the best has yet to come. My favourite cope excuse so far. Former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson personally led a group of commandos to capture a nuclear power plant. Yep, that was a thing. They tried to show some evidence of this via the bodies of the commandos, who were bravely beaten back. Few suspicious things in this video that could show it's not being too genuine is the lack of blood on any of the bodies, the lack of shell casings or damage to the terrain around them, etc. The most damning of all was at the end of the video, the man filming states, "Right, video's over," and all the corpses stand up laughing. Yeah, we weren't supposed to see that part. Yet Russia and...
What? Okay, several layers to that I'm not going to get into, but just the most surface level one. Boris Johnson. Okay, wait, actually, I gotta see, like, I know he's not the most fit man. I mean, neither am I. But, okay, well, he's not, well, again, he doesn't look overweight like I am. But again, I wouldn't imagine him leading a group of special forces. Oh...
insist that this video is real and the attack really did happen. Trust me, guys, I know what I'm talking about. I've never lied.
Armchair warlord?
Starwipe. So the Moskuva. To give everyone a brief overview for those who do not know, the Moskuva
Finally, we're like almost 5.5 minutes into the video and we finally get to the actual topic of the title.
was the Russian flagship of the Black Sea. It was one of the most powerful warships in the world and had the nickname the Carrier Killer for its ability to launch multiple anti-ship missiles all at once, with the expected capability that it would be able to overwhelm the defensive and counter-missile systems of an entire US fleet. The ship was constructed in 1979 and was originally named Slava or Glory before being renamed to Moskva or Moscow in 1995 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He was deployed in various modern Russian operations such as Georgia, Crimea, and Syria, and in February of 2022 he was deployed again, this time for the invasion of Ukraine. The Moskuva was the warship involved in the now famous Snake Island incident.
Just in case, yeah.
and had been nicknamed Nemesis by the citizens of Odessa due to its constant attacks on the city with its missile system, apparently even strafing areas along the coast with its 130mm cannons. The targets were indiscriminate and apparently even civilian in nature, but these might just be a case of mistaken identity or potentially Ukrainian propaganda, though in fairness Russia has not shied away from attacking civilians throughout this campaign. Part of the reason we think that it's propaganda is because the Moskuva does not have ground attack missiles. However, Ukraine has reported attacks on cities by both anti-air and anti-ship systems using a ground attack capacity. So either way you look at it, it's all a little bit fucky-wucky. Either could be true. I'm going to go with Ukraine's version.
Wait a second, isn't that the, I think that's the Admiral, oh god, I'm forgetting its name now. It's the Russian battle cruiser. I recognize the pictures of that weird dual gun turret.
To be honest, they have been a lot more truthful than Russia has this war. Just going back to that story about the British trained or British commandos led or urged by Boris Johnson himself attacking the big-ass nuclear power plant Russia is currently using as an ad hoc munition storage warehouse. No, you heard right, they are storing ammunition in a nuclear reactor. What could possibly go wrong? They claimed that these supposed Ukrainian commandos, of which, again, no solid evidence of their existence has ever been shown, had this document with them. Supposedly an evaluation report on Ukrainian troops being trained in the UK. It claims that the Ukrainian troops were so incompetent that they could not handle modern firearms, and that the UK had to purchase Soviet-era AKs for them. Of course, the more observant of you may realise that this is not a UK evaluation report, and the fact that it quotes the 1974 Privacy Act, which is a US law, as well as an AR reference number, should indicate that this is actually a United States document for troop counselling. Or at least that's what it's supposed to look like. It's not a legit document, it's a free template for one I found on this website. I mean, for fuck's sake. This is what Russia has been reduced to. It's quite sad. And they're buying ammunition from North Korea. I just want to emphasize that. They are buying ammunition from North Korea. Russia, everybody. But getting back to the Moskuva, just to add to the fucky-wuckiness, no one is quite 100% sure what actually happened to the ship. Well, I mean, everyone else, apart from Russia, is 100% sure. Russia is the only country in the world currently disputing what I'm about to tell you. Throughout the month of April, Ukraine had been strengthening its anti-ship defences along the coast of Odessa and had sunk several Russian patrol craft in and around Snake Island. For this reason, the Moskuva was ordered back out into open waters, but the Ukrainians hungered for vengeance. US intelligence had been keeping an eye on the ship and had been live feeding its coordinates and actions to Ukraine via 2 drones with a transponder code 40, which Reddit formed an unhealthy emotional attachment to. Because they all need therapy.
Yeah.
Seriously, stop sexualizing inanimate objects. Go outside, get laid. For fuck's sake, I'm a goblin boy neckbeard. I got laid. You can too. You just shower and talk about what she's interested in and listen when she explains something and tell her you'd love to hear more. It's not that hard. Anyway. On the night of the 13th of April 2022 at around 8:42 p.m, a Facebook post by a Ukrainian volunteer claimed that Ukraine had attacked and hit the Moskuva with 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles. This would later be confirmed by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. Hours later, Russia would refute these claims, stating the ship had caught fire in rough seas but was otherwise fine. The ship
okay, but my whole thing with that, my question, how does a ship catch fire in rough seas? I mean, the only thing I can think of would be somebody's cooking in the mess hall and rough seas causes something to tip and catch fire. But 2 problems with that. 1, I'm pretty sure it's been common practice for many years that even with safety equipment, you don't cook in rough seas. And 2, I don't think they'd use gas. It'd be like electric or something.
To begin its journey back to Sevastopol for repairs. Cloud-penetrating satellite imagery showed the ship to be about 90 miles from the Ukrainian coast, but not moving, and was surrounded by several other vessels. These included a small Russian naval tugboat. This boat would provide the only known photographs of the Moskuva at this time. The first image showed the ship heavily listing, smoke pouring from its interior, the life rafts were all missing, and the ship's onboard deck hoses set to continuous spray.
Yeah, that doesn't look like just a fire.
Forming a cross above the ship, a mark of respect often given to doomed vessels, showing the crew had given up attempting to save him. The second photo was taken much further away, showing the ship
Oh, and just one thing. LazerPig keeps referring to the Moskuva as him. I know in like a lot of countries they often refer to as ships as her, but with the Russians it's weird because from what little I've known, they base what they call the ship, like whatever pronouns they give it, based on the class of ship. I'm forgetting what it was, what it is now. I'll have to double check that and look it up.
Ship almost completely engulfed in smoke. At around 1 a.m. on April the 14th, the ship began to broadcast an SOS. By 1:14 a.m., the ship had rolled onto its side and power to the ship was lost. By 2 a.m., a Turkish ship had arrived and began evacuating crew. By 3 a.m., the Turkish ship was joined by a Romanian ship who reported that the Moskuva, pride of the Russian Navy, had sunk. But how?
Missiles.
Russia would always maintain the claim that the ship had been lost in a storm, but thanks to these pictures we can clearly see that there was no storm and the seas were calm. After several weeks of analysis, the US Pentagon confirmed they believed the ship had been struck by a missile and sank due to the damage, but no one could understand exactly how. The Moskuva wasn't exactly a rookie ship, it was a very modern vessel. It was equipped with a triple-tiered anti-missile and air defense system, and even if a missile had gotten through, the damage control systems of the ship were as good as any other. The ship had just been refitted in 2016, and the lack of funds had delayed that refit. By 2019, she was one of the most advanced warships of her time. According to Russia. While many naval experts have covered the sinking of the Moskuva to death by now, most of them only made wild speculations on how exactly the ship was sunk, how Ukraine managed to bypass the ship's 3-layered defense. Everything was speculated, from this actually being an internal explosion caused by fire, to it being a torpedo fired from a nearby British submarine, HMS Audacious, to an idea that Ukraine had fired hundreds of missiles, overwhelmed the Moskuva's defensive systems, and 2 had finally gotten through.
Or, as I guess he's going to say, we're going to come into the situation like with the Russian tanks' applique armor that was literally just full of like wood or sawdust or anything, that the Russians were lying about how well armed the thing actually was.
But 2 weeks ago, we got our answer, in the form of this maintenance report carried out just 14 days prior to the invasion. And boy does it paint a sorry picture. For fans of the Moskuva, the Soviet Navy, or even just naval ships in general, I apologize because this report is going to read like a horror story. Out of the 3-tier anti-missile systems in place, none of the actual systems were working at the time he was struck. The short-range sea-to-air launchers did not work, and the Phalanx last resort missile interception systems, of which the ship has 6 of, only 1 worked. The rest were being used for spare parts. This left the S-300 anti-air systems, which could theoretically protect the ship. However, the radar system they were linked to interfered with the communication system, and thus was turned off. But even when turned on, the system had apparently difficulty locking onto targets. And that twin-linked 130mm cannon that could be used as a backup to the Siwa system? Yeah, that also didn't work. Hydraulics leak, apparently. And of the damage control systems, yeah, none of those worked either. Several of the watertight doors were found to be leaking, some were wedged open. Out of the 500 fire extinguishers that were supposed to be on board, the ship only had 50, and due to constant theft, the safety equipment was locked in storage, of which only the Admiral had the key to, meaning in order to try and save the ship, the crew would first have to try and break open the lockers the safety equipment was in. It gets worse. Several of the engines were past their service replacement date by about 10,000 hours. They could only be turned on and run by express permission from the Admiral, meaning the ship was locked in at about half speed, but only for emergencies. The vast majority of the control systems were non-operable or simply did not have a functioning indicator light, meaning if there was a problem, no one on the bridge would know about it. The ship's generators were all quickly approaching their maximum service life and would appear to work at random. The steering gear was also partially jammed and the ship could only perform a 20-degree turn, and the entire ship had heating and cooling issues.
I know the saying is you go to war with the army you have, not the one you wish you had. But that just seems negligent. I mean, I know there's the whole thing with Putin and his command that they're probably everybody was too scared to actually say something, or so a whole bunch of miscommunication. But when stuff gets that bad, I'd have to think that that you die either way with that. Either you're going to die because you tell somebody that things got this bad, or you're going to die because nothing works and you get killed because nothing can defend you. You know, I watch a lot of things talking about like misconceptions about like about the Soviet Union during World War II, and there's the one thing that like it's like the T-34s, they were very poorly built. That like that at one point of the war they had like one gun per 6 soldiers, and like when you'd fire, if the one in front of you died, you'd grab the gun yourself and move forward. And like looking at history with Russia, they have the one with the gun and the 6 soldiers, that was just lying. The thing with like T-34s, they saw that like at the rate that tanks were being destroyed, you didn't want to put everything into building just one when it was most likely going to get destroyed within driving 100 miles. This, on the other hand, this just seems malicious.
Had the Moskuva been a US ship and been found in this state, the captain would have been court-martialed. It would have been a major publicity scandal, hauled through the press to the tunes of the dancing reformers, claiming that all this high-expense naval technology on board the ship was just a waste of time. The ship would have then probably been scrapped. My old river barge had less problems than this, and it still required an overhaul before it was deemed seaworthy again. But this is Russia. In spite of all the concerns discovered in the maintenance report, including an entire page on the galley that I won't get into, the ship was given a satisfactory rating, which was then signed off on by the Admiral. It was willingly and purposefully put into service into a combat situation in this condition. The result being, when those missiles hit the ship, the Moskuva did not even know it was under attack. There was simply a large explosion, possibly giving rise to the idea that damage was caused by an internal explosion. As if the captain had followed standard procedures for a Russian naval ship under attack, the weapon systems and consequently its radar would have been immediately switched on, meaning the communication system no longer worked, meaning there was no way for the engineering section to contact the bridge, and with most of the indicator lights non-operational, there would have been no way for anyone on the bridge to even realize the full extent of the damage until a runner from the lower decks arrived. By which point, unable to combat the fire, lock down the ship via the watertight doors, or even deal with the damage, the Moskuva was good as sunk. The crew seemed to be in a panic, and even before light had fully faded, the ship had been abandoned, with possibly a small detachment remaining on board to try and save the vessel, but to no avail. The ship would go down in the small hours of the morning on April 14th, 2022. 56 members of the crew would have to be rescued by a Turkish ship which responded to their distress call. Russia would only admit to 5 members of the crew losing their life a full month later, despite as much as 26 still reported as missing. A few days later, the 110-year-old Russian salvage ship, the Kimono, I'm probably not saying that correctly, arrived at the wreck in order to salvage the bodies.
Sorry, had to pause there for a second. And also, again, I just love the fact that, like, Russia has a ship that's still in service that's over 100 years old. Like, I've seen old pictures of this, and it originally was, like, steam and reciprocating steam engines powered. It's nuts.
As well as the sensitive equipment on board the ship. If Renault was able to recover the supposed pieces of the True Cross, which was contained in the ship's onboard chapel, is currently unknown.
I'm sorry, what, did you say pieces of the True Cross? What?
Fun fact, I have actually seen a piece of the True Cross. Well, the supposed True Cross. Last time I was visiting my mother in Spain, we went to the festival in Caravaca de la Cruz, the running of the wine horses. Supposed to symbolize something, I don't know, some medieval siege of some description, I'm not entirely sure. Basically, they decorate a bunch of horses and then charge them up a hill with 4 riders hanging onto the sides for dear life through a crowd of people. Fastest time wins. During the build-up to the event, there was a parade that included the actual King of Spain. The guy was just on horseback with his wife, chatted happily with the crowds, and got so close to me I could have punched him in the face. Following him a little later came every police officer in...
Actually, wait a second, yeah, I forgot, so I know with everything that happened with the Queen recently, you forget there are actually still a couple of countries that still have royal families, like Spain, of course, as you just said, Norway, I think that's the other one, I can't remember if there are any others.
in Spain, including a man who I presume was the chief of police because of how fancy his uniform was. Now, these guys were forcing the crowds back, like riot shields and everything. I couldn't even take a photograph of it because one of them grabbed me and it was like, no photo, no photo, no photo. And I was like, okay, dude. I had an assault rifle. You do not argue with something like that, okay? So I was like, what the fuck is this? What's coming? What could be more important than the actual fucking king of Spain? And what it was a bunch of flowers. And the smuggest looking asshole I have ever seen in my life. He was so proud to be holding these flowers. And the crowd were going wild. They were so happy to see these flowers. Turns out it was a piece of the True Cross. Alleged True Cross. I mean, I have my doubts to the legitimacy of that claim, but there was no way I was going to voice my concerns in that crowd. Also, I gave the King of Spain finger guns and he gave them back to me. Proudest moment of my life. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, boats, right, okay.
Oh, and just before that, I don't know, I was still, like, processing, but, like, some of those knights from before, or the people dressed as knights, I know it's, like, just for a celebration, but, man, I'd be more afraid for them than myself.
So, the Moskuva wreck has now been claimed as a cultural heritage site by Ukraine. Poor maintenance and lack of wartime readiness sunk the Moskuva, and honestly, if this is the state of the flagship, what is the rest of their navy like? We may never know. The Russian navy stays mostly in port these days. In an effort to find some sort of conclusion for this, let me say this. The Moskuva is the perfect symbol of Putin's modern Russia. All show, no punch. The Moskuva was built in Ukraine. Like the Soviet Union, much of it was built in its member states, who suffered the harshest in the tough times, while those living in Moscow lived lives of luxury by comparison. It should therefore come as no surprise that the only people who look fondly back on the USSR are the Russians, not any of its former member states.
Yeah.
And it's that mentality that dictates how the USSR in its history is presented to the Russian people. That Russia, not its empire, was able to compete with and surpass the combined efforts of the rest of the world, not by exploiting the resources of other nations, but by the exceptionalism of the Russian people, an amazing trait of almost heroic qualities only they possess above all other races. The trait of the worker, who can build anything bigger and better and faster than anyone else. The trait of the warrior race that through sheer will of strength and anger beat back the Nazis with absolutely no help from anyone else. It's that ignorance that led them to this moment. The Moskuva was allowed to head into combat in the condition it was in because he was the most powerful warship afloat. A pathetic lesser country like Ukraine had nothing to compare and would capitulate quickly under the might of the Red Tide. They genuinely believed that the ship would never face anything that could even remotely threaten it. And any threat it did face could quickly be overcome because this was a Russian ship, crewed by Russians. And that was the whole attitude of Putin's Russia. The entire country, much like the Moskuva, relies on the work of a far-gone empire with no understanding of how that empire was built and with none of the framework of that empire in place to support it. It has one of the largest militaries in the world with more tanks than any other nation on earth and had fooled itself into believing that that was enough, that no nation could challenge it because, well, they're Russia. I'd like to say that this war might be a humbling moment for Russia, finally faced with the realities of its own problems that for years it remained in denial regarding. But we know better. If living through Brexit has taught me anything, a country when faced with its own hubris does not grow and learn as a people, it doubles down. I can guarantee the result of this war will ignite a patriotic wave across Russia. Members of the military elite will be ousted as scapegoats and Russia will pile its failings onto them. And then tomorrow, it will be business as usual. The pro-Russian shills on Twitter like Captain Copelord and his sparkly friends will spend the next few years telling us how much of a good thing this is for Russia, actually. That Ukraine now has to suck NATO's ass for cheap handouts, which dilute it into a puppet state for the US to fight a proxy war with Russia, while Russia itself grows stronger. But the rest of the world may learn a little bit better from this. The next time Russia charges all its armies to the border and stamps its feet for not getting its way, I rather think Europe and the United States might now finally be less willing to bow to its demands. But because I do on occasion feel the need to remind people war is not glorious. It's fun to be back here in a comfortable chair with all the maps and telegrams and Twitter feeds watching the war unfold and cheering for joy when non-credible defense and NATO get a shout out from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. But there is a harsh reality to war that is often screened from those not actively on the front lines. It's easy to look at the now 50,000 soldiers Russia has lost as faceless individuals in uniforms, my enemy, and perhaps even take a little joy in their deaths. This was Mark Tarasov. Mark wanted to be a train driver, but to do so he needed a military ID, so not wanting to be in the army, he signed up for a year's service in the Navy. This is him back in December on his first day of deployment. His parents next to him looking so proud because he'd just been assigned to the Moskuva, the flagship. Mark is listed as one of the 27 missing crewmen. The Russian government will not admit if he is alive or dead, and because of this, his parents have been unable to hold a funeral or properly grieve for their son. He was 19 years old. Gonzalo Rila and the Cope Brigade can do and say whatever they want. For the 50,000 Russian families with empty seats at the dinner table, there is no glory gained in the blood of children.
So true. War is hell. You know, I remember stories that my grandfather would sometimes tell. The one on my mother's side from Lithuania. And he's said that when the Germans invaded, his brother came riding back to the farm on horseback, tossed him a rifle, and told him to run into the forest. They were going to try to be resistance fighters. And that was the last time he saw last time he ever saw his brother for the rest of his life. Well, that'll be it for now. So, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if not, watch the original video. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.